about to tell. I'll just let it run a couple of minutes. I'm Louise Comeau. I'm the Director of Climate Change and Energy at the Conservation Council of New Brunswick, and host for this session. So let me just do this and we'll just let this run. This gives you a bit of a sense of the story at the Conservation Council, and as people are coming in, we'll just let this run. It won't run the whole 6 minutes.
Us are dealing with a lot of mental health issues because of COVID. Like we're stuck at home, we don't get to have that social connection with people. And one of the things that people are starting to discover, and it's even starting to be utilized as like a prescription in some countries, is connecting with nature.
You know, there's lots of things to be angry about, but at the end of the day, what we really need in order to heal the land and to heal the earth is examples of harmony, or living in harmony with nature.
Stop that there. I just wanted to get a little sense of the mood, or create a bit of a mood, and it's some sharing around the project that the Conservation Council engaged in, that we're going to share with you today as part of this webinar that will describe and hopefully engage you in the incredible stories of art and climate change that happened with organizations across the country, Climate Action Network, Ecology Action Centre, Conservation Council of New Brunswick, and of course, the International Centre of Art for Social Change. As I mentioned earlier, we were just sharing that video as people were coming in, and I'm Louise Comeau. I'm the host of this webinar for the Conservation Council. And we are really excited to bring you this webinar on the power of art to inspire climate action. And I'm coming to you from the occupied and unsurrendered lands of the Wolastoq, Mi'kmaq, and Passamaquoddy peoples, who, despite centuries of injustice, continue to engage with us as settlers in peace and friendship. I want to just set the day up or the hour up. It may feel like a day, but it's an hour. That's all we have. And just the normal things. You can enter questions into the chat box. We've got you on mute. If the chat box isn't findable for you at the bottom of your screen, by all means, when we get to questions, unmute yourself and just jump right in. We are recording the session. It will be shared. We'll send the link out after we post it to YouTube. And we know that a number of the people on the call today have participated in our projects, and so we welcome you and celebrate you, and we'll highlight you as we go through the presentations. The way we've structured this webinar is in groups of conversation. And so first I'll introduce Judith Marcoux, who's the artistic producer, Judith Marcoux Projects, and founder co-director of the International Center of Art for Social Change. And she will, in conversation, talk about the project and how mentoring works, which is part of this dynamic. And then we'll hand it over to Climate Action Network and Ecology Action Centre and Conservation Council to have a conversation about their projects. So why don't I, with that introduction, acknowledge that these projects were and are generously funded, why can't I say that right now, by the McConnell Foundation, the BC Arts Council, Canadian Heritage, the Government of Canada's Emergency Community Support Fund, and Community Foundations of Canada. So why don't I hand it over to you, Judith?
Thanks so much, Louise, and thank you to everyone who has organized this gathering. I'm delighted to be part of this conversation. I thought it might make sense before I describe the program, I have 2 minutes, is to provide a definition of art for social change as we define it here at ICASC. We define it as groups of people making art themselves about what matters to them. This process facilitated by a trained, specialized professional artist. So this is a process where people don't buy or consume art, but they make art themselves about what matters to them in a process that is facilitated using all kinds of arts-infused games and exercises, conversations, dialogue. This work happens around the world. It has a history of about 70 years here in Canada, and there are hundreds of organizations and independent artists doing this work. So that's a description of the process. The program we started putting it together in September last year. Very soon we had to switch to touchy-feely work in person, flesh to flesh, to online. So that was a big pivot for us. And as it turned out, it was a very interesting and productive change that we went through. The process goes like this. First of all, we send out a call to early career or mid-career artists who are already doing community engaged art for social change. These applications are processed by a selection committee, a national selection committee, who pass on to us the people they think would profit from the program, and then we match them with senior mentors, people who have been doing this work for a long time, of which there are many in this country, and not very many opportunities to share the work. And then the third piece of all of this is that we match those pairs with community engaged organizations, non-arts organizations. So in this case, with environmental organizations across the country. Since the beginning of the program, 14 environmental organizations have worked in partnership with us, and close to 50 artists have been involved in the program. So it's an ambitious and pretty large initiative, and so far has exceeded all my best hopes in any case. So I think that's my 2 minutes, Louise, isn't it? Okay, so now it's my pleasure to introduce Laura Barron to you. Laura is one of our mentors twice now. She runs an organization called Instruments for Change. And Laura and I have known each other for quite a while. I first met you, Laura, I think in our first class at Simon Fraser years ago, right? And Laura has gone on to work both nationally and internationally in Art for Social Change. So Laura, just to get us going, I'll ask you this question. What stands out to you about your experiences doing this work with your mentors over the last year?
For me, coming from the classical music world and having been a private teacher for so many years, I really value the intimate one-on-one adult dialogue and education that can happen in that space, and have left that world for the community arts endeavors I've done in the last 10 years, and was so delighted to kind of return to that way of sharing knowledge and exchanging. And so in working in these triangles, as you described them, there's just a possibility for so many perspectives to support and design projects built for success.
Yeah, one of the things I've found so interesting about this process is that it is really about building relationships. And this takes time. And so we can't rush this kind of collaboration, because it takes time for people to, first of all, trust each other, or last of all, trust each other, but also to understand each other's languages, goals, and the usual ways they work. So there's a lot of listening involved. And when it comes into working with participants from the community, it's often a real switch for them to think of themselves as experts of their own lives and having the right to express themselves, their thoughts and feelings, through arts-based processes. And you know, we often get that, oh, I'm not an artist, but just give them the opportunity and a couple of tools, and wow, explosion.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what I love about this work, particularly when we use interdisciplinary approaches. There are less barriers to entry, more ways for people to find their own way, to find their voice. And one way that I describe why this work is so effective, using an arts lens towards expressing and exploring anything, came from a talk that I heard by Ken Robinson, the education expert, when he was asked to define aesthetics, which is often something we think of as very ambiguous. Beauty is something subjective and difficult to define. But he said it's very simple. It's the opposite of anesthetics. In other words, we are all in the act of helping to make people feel versus numbing their feeling. And that has really informed everything I do since then. In fact, because I do so many things, I'm a musician, a writer, a community artist, I've decided instead to call myself an aesthesiologist. And so I do just marvel at the way this work reveals and unveils those deep feelings that people have about social justice issues, about climate justice issues. It surfaces things that other kinds of communication and engagement can't.
Yes, I totally agree with you, Laura. And you know, I have a colleague who calls herself an arts doula.
I love it.
Which I kind of like. Yes, it really is in some essence about an artist being in service to community, to surface what matters to them, what they think and feel about specific topics, and to build community around those sensibilities and perspectives that can often lead to action. So it's art dialogue leading to action. And we've seen this I've been working in the field for 4 years now, and it's extraordinary how quickly people can enter this world of the metaphor without pushing, because it's inherent to us, in us, to express ourselves. When an individual doesn't express themselves, they can become ill. The same thing for communities. And I'm always astounded at how quickly that need to express oneself is surfaced in this work.
Yes, it's universal, people's need to be seen and heard.
Yes,
exactly. To have a voice.
Yes, those are wonderful insights. I'm particularly taken by this idea of making us feel rather than numb. We'll come back to that theme. Is it all right if I move to
Sure.
the second conversation. I'm monitoring our time. Thank you so much for that. I want to introduce Tika. I'm trying to follow my notes and I'm like, Tika, who I deal with and love and see every day, pretty much, who is the Membership and Domestic Policy Manager at Climate Action Network Canada. Tika will introduce the wonderful Tanya that she worked with, but I'll leave that to Tika to do, and just hand it over to you now, Tika.
Thanks, Louise. That's great. It's true. Louise and I do work together almost every day. It's yeah, it's rather telling that we gap on each other's names and details, and we're just so familiar. So really nice to be with all of you today. I'm joining from my home in Kenora, Ontario, Treaty 3 territory. It's Anishinaabe homeland. I was really delighted with this project opportunity. It came about very organically. And has resulted in a lasting friendship that I now share with my good friend Tanya Kalmanovic, who is also here joining us. Tanya's originally from Fort McMurray and is a Juilliard trained violin instructor and performer. She teaches at the New School in New York, among other things. And the project that brought us together was the Tar Sands Songbook. Tanya, do you want to come in and say hello? Maybe you want to do a more thorough introduction of yourself.
Sure, thanks, Tika. I can weave some introductory details in as we talk. But I wanted to honor something and amplify what came up in the previous conversation pair, which is about relationships. And I was thinking back to how it was that I came to know Tika, and it was actually in March 2019, I came to Halifax as an artist in residence with a local NGO called Suddenly Listen. And Norm Adams, who runs that organization, put us in touch with Joanna Bull to do a reading of the Tar Sands Songbook project at the Bus Stop Theater. So it was because Joanna introduced me to Tika, and Tika got the notice from Judith about the Futures Forward program that all of this came about. So I just wanted to resonate this kind of like invisible and robust and resilient set of networks that go from the boreal forest to, you know, I'm in Brooklyn, New York right now on the East Coast of the United States, to Atlantic Canada, and that these are sites of great potential and possibility that sometimes in my more despairing moments I forget exist. And my work on Tar Sands Songbook is really about leveraging my memory, my citizenship, and performing a kind of a reckoning with my relationship to a broad scale social and environmental disaster that has been unfolding in slow motion over the entire span of my life, over 50 years. So anyway, that was fun.
Yeah. So I think we'll get into the details of what the project is and was, what our participation was in it in just a minute. But I really do want to echo what you were just talking about the value of relationship building. So that's the thing that actually first piqued my interest in this project. I mean, the project itself is really cool, but the thing that was so valuable from a Climate Action Network perspective is that it really uplifts one of the three core pillars of how our organization does our work to promote climate justice, climate and climate ambition. So we're quite well known, I think, in the Canadian and international climate spaces for our work on domestic and international climate policy advocacy. But the thing that binds that all together is that we also are a network that represents an enormous number and vast array of people from civil society. So the thing that holds all of our work together and makes it possible to do our work is the relationships that we hold. And relationship building isn't a trivial thing. It's not just about, you know, processing membership dues and putting in place the structure for a network. It's about actually nurturing interpersonal relationship with people, getting to know them, getting to know what their values are, what motivates them, what their fears are. And so often in policy spaces, we really struggle, I think, to incorporate kind of the more emotive things that drive our work, the actual core values and feelings that we bring to this space. We get really tied up in a lot of analytical and logical thinking, being very strategic about our interventions. but fundamentally, the thing that brings so many of us to this work is a deep, deep passion for living things. We care about other people, we care about the earth, we care about living things. And so this project really appealed to me because it's a phenomenal way to reach out to others and build new connections and new relationships. Tanya, I'm going to let you talk a little bit more in detail about what the project is and how that happened, what you had envisioned, and then what we ended up actually doing.
Okay, so in a nutshell, my project is, I did not wake up one day 5 years ago imagining the project as it is now. It started off as, first of all, a kind of an itch in reaction to noticing colleagues of mine in the United States suddenly becoming really activated in a relationship to the tar sands, which I, because of internalized climate denial and silencing and the sowing of doubt around the negative impacts of industry activity, had been so deeply instilled and internalized in me that I could not notice until one day when I was on stage at a panel discussion at the New School about the arts and climate change in April 2015. And one of the other panelists started talking about the tar sands, and it hit me like a bomb. Like, that's my life. That's the story of my life. This obscure northern town where I was born, where my father worked, where my uncles worked, where my cousins worked, where my stepbrother died. All of that is literally the story of my life. And I realized I had a call, and I did not know at the time how I would realize that, was to put everything that I have at my disposal. My life story, my psychoanalysis, my personal reckoning with my history, my identity as Ukrainian, as a violist, as a fiddle player, as a historian of science, as a scholar, as a performer and composer, and as somebody who can speak in public, because that's what I do for a living as a lecturer, at the service of the most critical stories facing human need right now, or the need of all life on our planet. So in short, what it turned out to be is a 75-minute solo performance where I layer in audio recordings from interviews that I did with Indigenous elders, with my family, with engineers, with activists, with pro-oil influencers, with all kinds of people. I layer this into a 75-minute experience with live music, where I open a window very gently and invite audiences to come and stand with me to look at a place that they may never otherwise see, they may not wish to see, that has everything to do with how we all live today. So I open the door, I stand there, and I perform the process, how I came to live in relationship with my own story. And I do it so that others might do the same. And the sort of paradigm shifting, changing thing about my work with Climate Action Network, with Judith and Futures Forward, was really understanding how I could use a residency model to use my performance really as an offering, as one out of many things that I do in relationship to a place. So currently, my plan is to, over the next, until 2030, which I set because of the UN IPCC deadline, is to gradually over time do community residencies along pipeline, rail, and truck routes that are planned to or were meant to transport Alberta oil into the global market. So to trace out those relationships. I have lots more to say about it, but I'm going to pause there.
Can I interject just one thing? When I was Tanya's mentor, and one of the things that we did was share pedagogical facilitation models that Tanya practiced on her students all over the US and in Canada. And I think this combination of Tanya's own work, kind of an anomaly in the program, and then the consequent work she's going to be doing with communities across the country, is a really interesting model as well. So I just wanted to add that to the conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm going to keep it moving to the next conversation. Well, actually, Joanna will be talking to herself a little bit, but don't let that slow us down. I want to introduce Joanna Bull from Ecology Action Centre. Her facilitator was not able to join us today, but we want to have you spend the time available to talk about your project and to share the story of how you came to be involved. Over to you, Joanna.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Louise. And yeah, shout out to Yasmin, who was the artist that we worked with. It's really too bad that they're not here with us today. But I will tell my perspective on what we did. And I want to also shout out Roop Singh, who's here, who was a mentor for our project. So Roop, if you have something at some point that you want to chime in, just feel free to do that. So I'm calling in from Mi'kma'ki on the East Coast, and I'm learning how to say the name of the place I live, which is Bunamulkwadichk. I'm sure I'm saying it incorrectly, but it's also known as Dartmouth. Yeah, I'm super happy to be in this conversation, and really great to hear all the things that folks are saying. I've been working with the Ecology Action Centre in Halifax and Chibukduk for 7.5 years or so. And I'm the community engagement manager, and I personally love art-based engagement stuff. Like it gets me going in the morning, and I love it so much. And so when Judith and Kim had reached out to us, I was really excited about it, but EAC as a whole was excited because I really want to echo what Tika was saying, that, you know, all of our best thought out policy positions and statements and petitions and all of that is great, and it's all incomplete without the heart of it. And art is what connects with people's hearts, and it's so important if our movement is going to succeed, that people can really feel themselves in it. And so I've been exploring many different opportunities for you know, ways of bringing people in through art and using art, and kind of try to just explore those things. And then Judith came along with this amazingly constructed program, which was just so easy for us to say yes to and implement from an organizational perspective. So we started working with Yaz, and part of what we decided was that the way that we did it was really important. We didn't want all of this urgency that we often fall into. We wanted the way that we worked to feel good. We wanted to center relationships as the primary goal. We wanted it to be like small and deep rather than like really broad and shallow engagement. And for it to be something where we can really learn from people. And those are the things, those are our real goals. And we said, and if we can do 3 things, like 3 events, that'll be great. And we did. We ended up also partnering with a local group here called Wonderneath, which is an arts and education organization. They're amazing. And they really, really helped us with a lot of the kind of on the ground stuff. Because of how lucky we've been in Nova Scotia with COVID, we were actually able to do some hybrid in-person and online sessions where we had some people in person and some people joining virtually. So that felt very much like living in the future, of having these sort of hybrid spaces where people could connect. And it ended up being incredibly meaningful. The creation process was really slow. It took us most of the 6-month residency to really land on the questions we wanted to explore together. Engaging with our staff and engaging with other folks, and taking our time with that, not hurrying. And in the end, a lot of it ended up being about our relationship with land and decolonization and time, and the idea of a just future and a just livelihood, and how do we weave together a just future, and who has access to that, and what does that really look, what does that mean to each person? And so, you know, I think largely through the openness and generosity of Yasmin, who shared their land story and their relationship with land here and in other places, it really allowed the participants to open up and connect. And I want to also, I can't remember who had said it, maybe it was Judith, but people needed so little to just go there. Like, we had a couple prompting questions. We had a really like pretty lengthy and thorough land acknowledgement, really thoughtful. And then we just gave people paper and magazines and glue and scissors and said, okay, collage about it instead of talking about it. And so people created these really amazing collages. And at the end, we got folks to share about what they had made. And each person really brought a different piece of that picture in sharing what they had made, and had such deep and insightful and thoughtful things to say about what does a just future really mean, and what could it really look like, and what's included, and who's there, and who gets it. It was very beautiful. It was really beautiful. And there was, one of the things that Wonderneath really helped us with, as well as Roop with his networks, is we wanted to connect with folks that we haven't always been so great at connecting with. In the mainstream white environmental movement, we are striving to be inclusive, and we just don't always get it. We've been leaving out really important communities for too long, and there's a lot of time that it takes to build that trust. But it was really, I think, a big success on that front. We made some new connections and made some new friends of folks who came. One participant said, I've been following these kinds of conversations for a while, but I've never seen anything like this from the Ecology Action Centre. Like, if this is the kind of thing you guys are talking about, this is cool. Okay, I'm going to pay attention. And so it felt like a very warm and open invitation for people to come in and be in a really meaningful conversation with us, where we really are exploring this as an organization. Where are we going? What is our role in this movement? And how do we relate to decolonization? All of those questions. By doing something as simple as collaging was a way for us to open some of those doors. So I want to actually show you some of the collages. I have a couple of pictures. I was going to take more pictures, but they're back at my office, and now I can't go there right now because of obvious reasons. So I'm gonna share just a couple slides to give you a sense of the variety of things that that we saw. And so I'm not going to say anything to interpret them, because people said their own things, but you can take a look at the images there on your screen. That gives you a little bit of a sense of what, there were many more than that, but these were the ones I had photos for.
That's fabulous.
Yeah, and I just want to tag in, Roop, if there's anything that you want to add about the process, or anything that you saw. No pressure. You're not officially on the docket to speak today, but you were part of it all. So yeah, if there's anything you want to chime in on, feel free.
Yeah, I just want to kind of shout out Yasmin again, and I think just the type of heart, depth, and leadership that came from Yas really informed the space. And just like in the conversations that me and Yas would have one-on-one, both of us being people of color, we're really trying to get more of the white mainstream environmental movement to understand that social justice is environmental justice. There's no separation there, the way that they are intertwined. And so that was kind of at the root of what we wanted to bring into this project. And Joanna and the team there were just like wide open, supportive, and wonderful to work with. So I think it was just a prime collaboration, and really felt grateful to be a part of it.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
thank you.
Thank you.
Definitely,
Thank
we're
you.
grateful for all that. And I know you're kicking us off my time now, Louise, but just to say that there are lots of relationships that have formed that I think are going to go forward. So working with Wonderneath was amazing. Roop just said in the chat, there's some other kind of rad project that he's going to email me about. So I think I see this as it was a sort of a very tiny, quiet seed of something that I think will be many more things to come. So yeah, super grateful to have been part of it all.
Wonderful. I'm not trying to rush you. I'm just
That's all
trying to keep to the promise. That's all. The final conversation is with myself and Danielle Smith, who was part of our project with the Conservation Council. Since I didn't get to show you the video, and what I'm going to do while I'm explaining this story is to just show you a couple of things. So let me close this and start this story by telling you how I came to participate or to be so grateful for Judith reaching out to us. And the reason is that I too, like Tika, have spent a very long time working on climate change. I'm in my third decade, and I have had to do it all, as it were, including having to engage with far more of my rational brain than I believe is actually healthy. And so for the last few years, I've been really struggling to find ways to not just help me engage differently, but to open new pathways, other pathways for people to participate in environmental issues, and climate change, of course, being the one that drives my life. And one of the things that we did was create this series of videos and a whole portal focused on communicating climate change and engaging people in climate change through love. And so this portal is here. I'll put it into the chat later. But there are a series of incredible videos of New Brunswickers talking about what they love to do. And then we explain how climate change might affect that. Now, you might say, well, what's that got to do with Judith? Well, the reason is that when she approached us, I thought, this is about the love door. And so, of course, we want to do this project. Of course, we want to participate. And I learned some incredible things. And one of them is that indeed, and I'll just give you a sense of some of the work that came out of this as I'm speaking before Danielle and I engage quickly. That indeed this project did create new pathways for participation and relationship. Absolutely, the relationships are so strong. Many of the people in our project, I think most of them are on the call today, and we don't want to stop. We are finding ways to keep the project going. And each of them created videos. Some of the projects were jointly done. The surprises were, I can't even begin to tell you all of the surprises, but some of them include that I didn't expect that we would have this combination of professional and non-professional artists or emerging artists and so on. Everything that happened was a delight and a surprise, and absolutely, I would say, for me, and it happens every time I talk about it, I get emotional. So the feelings part of it really work. And the question then is, how do we keep that going and open those doors to participation? So let me introduce you to Danielle Smith, one of our project participants, but who also is someone I know from the University of New Brunswick. She works in the sustainability office there. And so why don't I just open the conversation, Danielle, to you, and just get you to start by talking about the process and what happened to you during the process of engaging in this work.
Sure. So if you caught the beginning of the video, for me, I was talking about the need to connect. I felt very isolated during the pandemic. I felt like I was dealing with mental health issues because I wasn't able to connect with my community. And I was honestly just really starved for connection. And when I came across this project, I had no idea what it was. I just signed up for it and I missed the first meeting, so I was still pretty confused. And when I got to the second one, I mean, it took a while for me to understand actually why I was there. And that was a kind of a joke with our group, is that I think I was a little hesitant. I am an environmental coordinator. I have plans, I have schedules, I am very efficient because I need to be, because it's a big area and a big topic. So for me, the idea of approaching it really slowly and having that ability to connect, and the conversations that we were having at first, I didn't see the importance of them because I always come at this kind of work from an urgency perspective. And for me, that was one of the biggest moments for me to be like, oh, wow, there's a way of engaging with climate change that isn't me fighting tooth and nail to get people to either change their behaviors or change their policies, or to just get them to understand the urgency of the problem. So that was sort of my biggest sort of takeaway, was that you can engage in climate action without that sort of fight. You can do it in a nice, calming, harmonious, like healing way, which I didn't honestly think was possible before I started this process.
That's and I know all of you who were part of the project will want to thank our facilitator, Juliana Bedoya, who I think is on the call today, who just did an incredible job of facilitating the process. I mean, one of the things that really surprised me, and Shauna's here as well, Connell, who was the mentor to Juliana, one of the things that really surprised me was occasionally I would jump in on a meeting, and of course everything was virtual, and everybody would not be talking. They would just be working and just be together online. It was amazing. And you think, well, how can that work? And there it was. It was just this amazing experience. So the process helped you connect. In terms of the ideas that were generated, I mean, how did you come to this idea from harm to harmony? Was it the process? You know, how did the art aspect of it also come to the fore?
I think a lot of us realized that we were dealing with eco-anxiety when it came to climate change at different levels. And we had a very multi-generational group of people, so we were all coming at it from different perspectives. And I think the one thing that we were all able to connect with from one way or another was sort of our love for nature and our acknowledgement that it does really have this healing power. And I mean, Mario's videos that he's taken and Josephine and Dirk's work with like agriculture and like just the breadth of the scope that we were able to cover. Like we talked about extinction and extirpation. We talked about corporate strongholds. We talked about the healing power of nature. We talked about the importance of agriculture and growing your own food. So it was just amazing that everybody was able to kind of talk about what was really important to them, but it still had a nice flow and it all connected to that. Like, we need to protect nature, whether it's you're concerned about the plastics in the ocean or you're concerned about oil companies. It really enabled us to kind of talk about the things that we were really concerned about in a really sort of beautiful way, and with so many different art mediums too. We had felting, we had graphic artists, we had a tree, we had plastic that was weaved into rugs. Like, it was just amazing, the things that were produced for the show in such a small amount of time. Like, before we actually like came to a conclusion of what our like show was going to be about, I think we had like 3 weeks to do everything. So it was also just sort of like I think we were all amazed that we were able to make that deadline and produce a show that was just really quite beautiful.
Wonderful. I'm just gonna, I want to shift us into open conversation, but just to note to folks that one of the unexpected aspects of this was, again, relationships with the University of New Brunswick and the University of New Brunswick Art Centre. And so we were able to host an art show, and we had a 6-week, art show, which was amazing, and people registered. You couldn't all go at once, so we all had to schedule. And when I went to pick up the art to mail it back to our project teammates, the facilitators at the Art Center basically said, look, this was a very positively received art show, and we had incredible feedback. And so to have that opportunity, not only to be in process, but to create it, but to show it to a broader audience, to create the videos on our website. I'm just wondering, Corey, just as I open up to questions, if you could do me a quick favor. I'm afraid I'll mess my screen. Could you put in the website link to our Art from Harm to Harmony link and our For the Love of links? The reason for that is we actually had a photographer come in and take photos of everything. So everything's on the website. It's a beautiful thing. So with all of that, as background to this incredible experience from everyone. Thank you, Corey. Why don't we open it up to questions? I'm going to do my best to monitor the chat. If you are having any difficulty, if those of you mostly I think know, but it's down at the bottom if you just hover your cursor. But if you want to open up unmute yourself and speak, by all means, please do so. So why don't we open it up? Does anybody have something they'd like to add from any of the projects, a question to ask, anything at all? And I will look at the chat to see what I could discern. I have a question in the wings if needed. So let me just see here. Would you have recommendations, approaches to how to use the power of art to inspire climate change with youth? Any experience you can share, open to anyone. Thank you. Yes, Judith.
We did a 6-year project with 15 to 18-year-olds around the subject of climate justice called the Earth Project. And if I would have one suggestion about how best to start a process of working with young people who are so far ahead of so many of us in their perspectives and ideas about climate change and the crisis that we're all facing, is to partner with a youth-led or a youth-centered organization so that you can begin to develop a relationship with them and with the people in their networks, in their circles. You know, I don't suggest going uninvited into organizations, but really just to reach out and listen and develop the arts processes that you want to use in conversation, in dialogue with your environmental partner and with maybe a youth advisory, which we always had, who really kept us on a better path than we would have had without them. And to pay them, absolutely pay youth for any kind of participation, because so many people are, you know, working at part-time jobs as well as going to school. So just to take into account the full range of the context within which you're working, and that goes for any kind of partnership.
Okay. I'm just waiting for questions to come in, and so I'm going to ask a question just to see if any of the people who participated in any of these projects has something to add or to offer around this question. And I ask it partly because of the rational side of my brain and the way funders work. They want measurement. And so one of the questions I anticipate my funders asking me at some point is whether or not the project has led to participants carrying their healing into other aspects. So for example, on the I'll speak to the issue I know more fully, you know, has participation in this art pathway, if you will, allowed you to engage more on environmental issues, if that's the path, or climate change in particular, whether that's a lifestyle choice or citizenship or anything. Tanya's obviously described it in a very powerful way. She's engaging on a very hard issue we deal with in Canada in terms of what will happen to the oil sands. But I'm just wondering, has it spilled over into other aspects of your life that, in a way that you might want to mention? Yeah, Tanya.
So I just, speaking in particular to our previous question about working with youth, I want to acknowledge that the arts are not a magical panacea. And arts institutions are institutions that are shaped by the same structures of discrimination, the same limited notions of authority and hierarchy that shape most of our other decisions. So in the same way that arts education is done by people, policy is made by people. So one of the more powerful things, I think, for me was really coming to terms with the ways in which the world in which I work, which is music education, which is to say, despite its claims to being inclusive, is effectively concentrated on the interests and models of, say, 2% of the world's population, is recognizing the way that the thinking problems are internalized and naturalized into all of our structures of hierarchy and value. So a lot of that comes back down to thinking through sorry, I'm just lowering my hand as I do it. But these are crises of imagination as much as they are, problems of programming. So I think that before we can think about effective, like programmatic interventions, we need to think through the ways in which our thinking is shaped by these kinds of structures. So I'll just offer that when I was 14 years old, and this is the genesis of my entire piece and one of the first lines in it, I decided to become a musician because I thought it had nothing to do with oil. And it has taken me until now to see how oily music is and how musical oil can be as well. So that's a longer story to think through how it is that we can activate these different modes and channels of thinking. So I just want to throw that out there as kind of a provocation. It was like, I think I thought the 4 provocations in there, but one of them was to resist magical thinking about the arts.
Exactly. No, it's fantastic. And I appreciate that caution. At the same time, I also really want to, for us anyway, to celebrate the opening of the emotional with the rational. Because it's to me what's lacking in mobilizing people to engage, because they're not engaging at the level of their hearts. And so totally agree with you on what you're saying. At the same time, I guess for us newbies, we're feeling pretty good about opening up this pathway. For example, my perception is that the people who participated in the Conservation Council project would not have participated in climate change in any other way that I offer it up, right? That this was a completely new pathway that was not available before. And so it's broadened participation, it's democratized engagement on the climate change issue in ways that this country needs, this planet needs. And so the question is, how do we, I think, accept and hold the points that Tanya's making at the same time as acknowledging that it's something that's terribly missing from our efforts to transform society. And so, this is the struggle that I have between over celebrating and under celebrating. I'm just wondering, do others? Yes, Josephine, thank you. I was just going to say, would please others come in? Thank you. Josephine, over to you.
I'm delighted to be here, and thank you so much for hosting this webinar. It's really a wonderful opportunity to reflect on our successes, and I appreciated Danielle for speaking so eloquently about our project. And to speak specifically to your question about how the project has led to involvement in other projects, I've joined, my role in the project was to spearhead a group of 9 people. Dirk Grunenberg was also one of the participants in the Seeds of Hope project that I helped facilitate. And we created a piñata and the stuffed it with seeds, and it was decorated by a group of refugee youth whose survival is dependent on the garden that they grow in the summer. So they created garden images that were applied to a piñata shape stuffed with the seeds that Dirk had generously contributed, and they're seeds that he also relies on for his farm, and I gave them back to him because he's going to be planting those seeds. Anyway, the idea of seeds is really important, and I've carried on the work by joining a committee here in Fredericton, and the purpose of the committee is to create a vision for a healing center for refugees. So I really support the concern that was raised about formal institutions. It's come up in our committee in relation to the healthcare system. So this project modeled just community-based involvement. My involvement with the refugee youth that were participants is on a volunteer basis. It was very much an organic project that came together through people's enthusiasm and people's generosity. And so this Healing Center committee has been really interested in the work of this project and the engagement with refugee youth. And we've talked about building a garden and very much reinforce the healing power of nature. And I was so galvanized by this project that I brought so much enthusiasm and also a model of success. So thank you very much. It's a delight to be here today and a delight to reflect on the questions and ideas that are being presented.
Thank you, Josephine. Anybody else would like to make a comment before I do a closing round? with folks? Any questions? Judith, I wondered if you would maybe like to start just some closing comments before we end the session.
I was just thinking about how hard it is for a lot of us in our daily lives to take time out for reflection, and how creating art in any of its forms gives us the space to explore, experiment, take risks. And I just wanted to emphasize that that the pressure that we all feel these days can be profoundly alleviated and create a sense of hope and possibility through these art making processes, which are often more important than the products that come out of those processes. So I just wanted to sort of put in flashing neon lights reflection through art making.
Perfect, great. Joanna?
Yeah, I thank you for bringing that in. And I would say, you know, working in an environmental activist organization, sometimes it almost feels like we're afraid to take the time to reflect, because it's like if we stop just doing 1 second, then we might lose. And if we lose, we're going to lose everything. And I think that there's a real, as long as we keep on that hamster wheel, then we'll never see that. You know, if you're seeing in the chat about being able to really imagine what we want to see and feel the way forward, requires that balance, requires that reflection if we are going to be successful. And so I think that the idea of like, oh, it's time to reflect and connect through art is not a frivolous thing at all. And it's something that's desperately needed in all of our activist spaces. And we need to learn how to integrate that way of being more into the way that we're working to change the world. Because you can't just have fire all the time. You also need the groundedness. So yeah, so really, and that's what this project really was for me personally. Like you said, sitting in a room of people or with a screen of people and just being quiet and reflecting together was very, very powerful. So
wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Louise, can I come in just for a quick second?
Please, yeah. I was just going to you there.
Yeah, Joanna, you really hit something there for me. One of the things that's so powerful about using the space that art provides us for reflection is that it's a socially sanctioned way of grieving publicly and together, collectively. I don't think we get very many opportunities to do that. And for me, a lot of the connection that I made through the Tar Sands Songbook work was really to sit with my own grief and to hear and feel and experience the grief of others collectively, and to go through that mourning process and then to come out of it with hope afterward. And I think it's hope that's born out of the connection that we have with one another and the possibilities that relationships carry for us to be creative together and to imagine something better. So I think that our work with Tanya on the Tar Sands Songbook was really just like a little kernel of what's possible. And I hope we get to continue the work long into the future, because it's just so transformatively powerful and beautiful.
Yeah, yeah. Tanya, and then maybe Danielle, just as we close. Did you want to have a final thought, final word?
Yeah, I think that in as much as I say that I offer my work to audiences as a mechanism for opening their own doors to reckoning, I would say that I need to do this work again and again and again. And one of the larger things that was important for me in this was taking my work out of a capitalist conception of an art marketplace. And instead of it being a product that would be sold and disseminated, and then there would be another product to be sold the next year, to disrupt that logic by saying, no, I'm going to take the time that it takes for me to do this. So if I thought it was like weird to have to spend $5,000 to record an experimental free improvisation album, imagine my surprise to discover that it's $50,000 to $75,000 to take a project to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. So there are economies of this, right? So coming up with creative and resilient ways of creating the space to do this again and again. It's not a one-off. It has taken me through doing this work to come into a closer relationship with the brother I lost, the father I lost, the stepfather that I lost, to various forms of mining accidents. And I would also offer that one of my first friends that I made through this work when I started going back home was Woodland Cree songwriter and youth worker who told me that his mother taught him that there were 5 ways of healing: talking, singing, yelling, laughing, and crying. And I offer that as a kind of a benediction in my program all the time, that to say, if we do well in this healing work is work that we must do again and again. I also think through the idea that stories don't live in texts or in libraries or on a CD or on a museum wall, but they live between the listener and the teller. The meaning is mutually constructed.
Yeah, thank you. Danielle, just a final word before we...
Sure, I'll try to be as quick as possible. I was just going to reiterate that healing aspect. I think for any advocacy person, you're going to deal with some burnout. You're dealing with issues that are so far beyond your own agency to change, and it can be really, really, really hard. And I think a lot of us live in silos within larger institutions, and it's really hard for a lot of advocates to have that connection that's not just griping about all of the troubles that you're dealing with. So I think art has this really amazing power to connect people that are struggling in a way that doesn't bring up all the trauma again and again and again. And I think this is going to be crucial for youth, especially around climate, because eco-anxiety is real. People are going to lose their homes. It's going to be hard for people. And I think it's important that we all get in front of it and have ways to help people cope with some of these big issues that they have really no personal agency to change.
Yeah. Yeah, no, thank you so much, all of you. This has been very, very powerful. And I agree in terms of, how I've come at it. I feel many times, and most days, that we're losing. But with this work, I feel we're winning. And so let me close by saying that the work will continue. We're going to find a way. And I'm very grateful for your participation today. It is recorded, and we will share the link. And have a great evening. Bye-bye.